For 92 years since their first World Cup appearance, Egypt had never won a single match. But in the summer of 2026, that barrier was finally broken. Egypt closed out the group stage with an unprecedented run. They held Belgium to a draw, then defeated New Zealand to claim the first World Cup victory in their nation's football history. A tense draw against Iran secured their first ever spot in the knockout rounds. The next opponent, waiting in the round of 32, is Australia. Why does a football victory carry such special weight for a country the world almost always talks about in terms of achievements from thousands of years ago? The answer lies in the present. Modern Egypt doesn't live inside ancient tombs. Behind that layer of heritage is a nation that breathes and moves constantly. More than 109 million people are rushing to find jobs, taking their kids to school, lining up to buy bread, paying rent, and working hard to build a future on a narrow strip of land tucked inside a desert. How can a country produce enough fresh water, food, housing, jobs, and hope when most of its survival across generations still relies on a single river? To understand why a new victory means so much, you first have to look at the place where nearly all of Egyptian life is compressed. If you look at an administrative map, Egypt is a massive territory stretching across 1 million square kilometers, encompassing vast deserts to the east and west, the Sinai Peninsula, and long coastlines along the Mediterranean and Red Seas. But if you look at the map of real life, the country shrinks into a thin green corridor running along the Nile, before blossoming into a large fan-shaped delta in the north. According to a national development report published in 2021, the territory where people actually live accounts for only about 7% of the country's total area. More than 109 million people share this cramped space where Greater Cairo, cities, villages, and farmland form one continuous stretch. The Nile acts like a sharp border defining life itself. On one side lie lush green fields. Take just a few hundred steps outward, and you meet nothing but dry sand and rocky gravel. The vast majority of Egypt's population, agriculture, and settlement history are tightly bound to this water corridor. That absolute concentration creates immense pressure. It drives up land prices, pushing urban concrete to expand and eat away at precious farmland. It creates gridlock traffic, forces public services to operate at maximum capacity, increases the distance between home and work, and makes expanding living space seem hopeless without more water and infrastructure. The desert is often mentioned as a natural way out, but the desert is not a blank canvas where you can simply drop down buildings. Turning sand into a city requires massive resources: fresh water, power grids, transit, schools, hospitals, employment networks, and above all, it must fit the real financial capacity of the people. The Nile is why Egypt can sustain such a large population. But having so many people depend on one narrow corridor means any fluctuation in the water supply immediately becomes a national security issue. Every square meter of lost farmland is a costly trade-off, and every new wave of population presses harder on old cities. What does a day look like when millions share the same urban system that has been expanding for generations? The answer begins before dawn, when Cairo wakes and millions make their way to schools, offices, markets, and jobs that never appear on tourist maps. Life here begins long before first light. As the first call to prayer sets the rhythm, vendors lay out fresh produce, bakeries fire up their ovens, and microbus drivers begin their shifts. But not everyone moves at the same pace. The energy of downtown is worlds apart from the traditional neighborhoods, crowded suburbs, and quiet new developments out on the desert edge. When the day truly begins, millions merge into a multi-layered transit network. Metro doors blend with the honking of buses, microbuses, and motorcycles, while pedestrians weave beneath packed overpasses. This congestion is more than an inconvenience. It means stolen hours of sleep, rising fuel costs, the struggle to find childcare, and a quiet stress weighing on daily life. Cairo's housing is a landscape of overlapping pieces. Decades-old buildings stand beside dense apartment complexes and sprawling informal settlements. It is not simply a portrait of poverty, but how the city expanded on its own to absorb a population growing faster than planning can keep up with. The vast distance between affordable housing and jobs forces workers into grueling daily commutes. In the markets, the economy is felt with every coin exchanged. A family's basic basket revolves around bread, beans, vegetables, oil, and rice, with meat added only when the budget allows. A national economic shift always finds its way into the kitchen, turning into a cutback dish or a recalculated budget. Keeping this rhythm balanced often falls on women. They are everywhere, running businesses, teaching, providing healthcare, managing shops. But their heaviest burden is the invisible labor of stretching tight household budgets while caring for children and the elderly. Combined with a lack of childcare, this remains a major barrier, keeping women from fully entering the formal workforce. As evening falls, Cairo carries on. Coffee shops come alive with chatter around small screens showing football. Late dinners are served, students study for exams, and many rush off to a second job. The city keeps grinding long after the tourist spots close. Yet every loaf of bread and every glass of water here begins in the same place, the river that has sustained Egypt for thousands of years, now meeting the demands of a population larger than ever. To put a single meal on the table, the Nile's waters must complete a long journey. They flow through a national regulatory system, weave into irrigation canals, and finally reach the arid fields. There, water becomes wheat, vegetables, rice, or rows of sugarcane. Once harvested, produce is loaded onto trucks, passing through transit hubs before showing up at a market or a family's table. The country's reliance on this river is almost absolute. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, Egypt depends on the Nile for over 90% of its water, and agriculture is by far the largest consumer. The delta in the north is the nation's primary breadbasket, providing roughly 3/5 of its total food. Yet the delta is under immense pressure. Relentless urbanization devours farmland, while the coast faces saltwater intrusion and climate change. On plots that shrink with each generation, farmers face more than water scarcity. Their survival is tied to strict irrigation schedules, water quality, rising fertilizer and seed prices, fuel for pumps, volatile markets, and the logistics of moving a harvest. Follow the journey of a single loaf of bread, and you see the whole system. It requires Nile water, delta soil, domestic wheat, and massive imported grain. It moves from flour mills to fiery ovens through government subsidy programs before reaching families. Bread is more than food. It is where water, agriculture, international trade, and social stability all collide. And yet, the foundation of this system relies on a transboundary river, one where Egypt must share the flow and face ongoing risks from upstream. But does the broad word Egyptians accidentally hide the deep contrasts between Cairo, the Delta, Upper Egypt, the Nubian communities, and the coast? The river connects the country from south to north, but it does not shape the same reality for everyone. Leaving the noise of Cairo behind, the Nile splits into branches, creating a vast delta. Here, agriculture blends with crowded villages and busy wholesale markets. The delta is the nation's food engine, but also where urbanization constantly threatens to shrink farmland. Heading north, Alexandria emerges along the Mediterranean. This city doesn't live in the past among ruins, but breathes through the hectic pace of its ports, trade, industry, and fishing docks. The memory of a once glamorous metropolis now stands face to face with erosion, flooding, and rising seas. Following the river south, Upper Egypt opens up with settlements clinging to both banks. Agriculture and heritage tourism in Luxor or Aswan are the main livelihoods. But the wide gap in services and opportunity compared to the capital has forced many workers to migrate to the big cities. Deeper toward the southern border lies the Nubian community. Their long history of settlement is bound up with large-scale relocations caused by dam and reservoir projects. Their architecture, music, and language preserve deep memories of home, and modern Nubian life carries complex values that cannot be reduced to a few colorful brushstrokes for tourism. Separated from the valley are the Sinai Peninsula and the Red Sea coast, where Bedouin communities live through fishing and tourism. Distance from the center creates stark differences in infrastructure and opportunity. In all these spaces, the pyramids and ancient temples do not stand apart like silent museums. They blend into present-day life, becoming the actual workplaces for tens of thousands of guides, vendors, drivers, and researchers. They carry immense symbolic weight, shaping how the world sees this nation while generating vital tourism revenue. The Nile connects Egypt, but geography, history, and economy create many different Egypts at once. Whether in Cairo, the Delta, or the South, the greater part of daily life is held together by something hard to see on a map: family, the neighborhood, and shared meals. Every meal here is like a miniature social map. Everyday dishes, the stewed fava beans of full madams, taamea falafel, koshari, or loaves of baladi bread, are far more than a culinary list. They reflect where ingredients come from and how prices shape daily choices. A shared plate of rice or a warm bowl of molokhia shows both the effort to make ends meet and the bond holding everyone together. Surrounding that table is an extended family network. It stretches from grandparents, aunts, and uncles to lifelong neighbors and relatives working abroad. When formal services grow too expensive, this network becomes a social safety net, watching children, recommending jobs, splitting rent, contributing to weddings, or pooling resources for medical bills and tuition in a crisis. The pulse of that community is organized by faith. The call to prayer shapes not just spiritual life, but the rhythm of work and rest. Friday afternoons, Ramadan, Eid, and family rituals across both Muslim and Coptic Christian communities create shared spaces that bring people together. At the heart of this structure are women. They are by no means only at home. They are employees, teachers, doctors, vendors, business owners, and farmers. Yet alongside the income they bring in, they still shoulder the vast majority of unpaid care work, an invisible and heavy double burden. Even so, this deep connection has a flip side. It brings strict financial obligations, marriage expectations, and pressure to succeed. In spaces with little privacy, young people depend on family longer because of high housing costs, while those working far away carry the weight of supporting relatives back home. Families can absorb many shocks, but they cannot create millions of new jobs every year. To understand the greatest pressure facing modern Egypt, we must look at how its people actually earn a living. The public sector has long been the path to stability, secure wages, benefits, and social status. But the state's capacity to absorb new workers has reached its limits. Beyond it, millions fight to get by within a vast network of private businesses, grocery stores, mechanic shops, delivery services, restaurants, workshops, and tech companies. Alongside them is the massive puzzle piece of the informal workforce: street vendors, construction workers, day laborers, domestic helpers, and unregistered businesses. It is impossible to call this economy a mere failure. It serves as a vital lifeline, a gateway into the labor market, and a way for small businesses to survive. Yet, it demands a brutal trade-off. Usually, no contracts, no insurance, volatile incomes, and no safety net in an accident or job loss. Behind this picture lie the pillars of the nation's foreign currency: tourism, Suez Canal traffic, exports, investment, and remittances. These macroeconomic terms are tied to flesh and blood people: the guide at the ruins, the dock worker at the port, the driver, the hotel staff, and the families quietly living off money sent home from the Gulf or Europe. The real pressure becomes clear when wages sit next to prices. Constant fluctuations erode income through rent, food, transportation, private tutoring, and healthcare. As the ability to save shrinks, many young people postpone marriage. The core pressure is the capacity to create jobs. According to World Bank estimates, about 1.3 million young Egyptians enter the labor market each year, while the economy generates only around 500,000 new jobs. When old cities run out of room and the economy needs more work, can Egypt simply step into the desert and build a new future from scratch? That is precisely the promise of the avenues, railways, and new megacities rising from land that was once almost entirely empty. With only a tiny fraction of its territory inhabited, Cairo bends under a massive population burden, while precious farmland can no longer be swallowed by endless urbanization. Facing an urgent need for housing, offices, and infrastructure, the government has launched a series of next-generation cities, aiming to expand the livable area and unlock investment. The new administrative capital stands out as a colossal symbol of this promise. It carries the expectation of relieving density in the old capital, while introducing modern infrastructure, new rail lines, and tens of thousands of jobs. Yet its true social impact must be measured by accessibility. Behind the gleaming glass facades, the biggest question is, who will actually live there? Can ordinary citizens afford to buy or rent? Where will the service workers who run this city live? Ministries are moving, but are their employees' families ready to follow? Are the jobs diverse enough, and will the transit connecting back to Old Cairo serve low-income earners, or will the new city rely entirely on private cars? Stepping into the desert also means challenging natural limits. Every new metropolis needs running water, sewage systems, energy, cooling, and food shipped in from elsewhere. This raises a sharp question. Does building more space actually solve the eternal constraints of the Nile, or simply stretch an already strained water system further? A place only becomes a city when it has schools, markets, jobs, neighbors, transit, memories being made, and the power to hold on to people across generations. Without community life, a city is nothing more than silent blocks of concrete. Egypt can build sweeping avenues and soaring towers, but what decides the future is not just where the younger generation will live, it is whether they find a meaningful role within that country. And it is this very generation, constantly asked to create more with less, that stepped onto the World Cup stage to write a new chapter of history. A young country waits restlessly for opportunity. Millions of youths study hard, take exams, and travel far for jobs. Many are forced into the informal sector. Some consider labor migration. Others quietly postpone marriage and buying a home. Yet not everyone wants to leave. So many choose to stay, moving to the capital, launching startups, working remotely, pursuing the arts. What they share most is a hunger for real symbols of success that belong to their own generation. Football has long run deep through the veins of this society. It lives on the cramped pitches between neighborhoods, in the booming cheers from coffee shops, and within the domestic club system. Mohamed Salah shines as a brilliant global icon, but he didn't build this story alone. The national team is a collective force forged by the passion of tens of millions of fans. True to the promise of this story, a miracle happened in the summer of 2026. Egypt held Belgium to a 1-1 draw, then soared to defeat New Zealand 3-1, capturing their first World Cup victory in history. A 1-1 draw against Iran earned 5 points and second place in Group G. For the very first time, Egypt advanced to the knockout stage, setting up a clash with Australia in the round of 32. This achievement carries immense weight, not because a win can cure water scarcity, unemployment, or housing costs. It matters because, for one brilliant moment, Egypt is not introduced through pyramids, mummies, or dead pharaohs. The country is seen through its living people, fighting hard and achieving what no generation before them ever could. Past and present collide through contrasting images. The silhouette of ancient pyramids stands as a backdrop to a gleaming modern stadium. Silent stone statues give way to the faces of fans in ecstasy. History was once written on tomb walls. Today, it is written on green grass. Of course, football cannot be idealized. The sudden unity of a match does not turn into sweeping reform. In the end, the future of the youth still hinges on education, jobs, housing, and a real chance to take part in the economy. The greatest meaning of this miracle is not that Egypt has escaped the shadow of its past. It is that the current generation has proven they, too, can create a memory the future will look back on. That is why the victory matters so much. It lets modern Egypt be seen in the present tense. But the real history of this generation will not be decided in 90 minutes. It will be decided by what happens when they go back home. The Nile, shimmering in the desert, green patches of farmland, a warm loaf of bread, a packed metro car, a bustling Cairo market, the hurried steps of a woman heading to work, the rhythm of a Nubian village, the concrete blocks of the new city, the eyes of a young job seeker, the stadium grass, and the glowing faces of the fans. It all blends into a picture that never stops moving. In reality, Egypt has not fully solved water scarcity, population density, jobs, housing, regional inequality, or climate resilience. But this country is by no means stuck in the past. More than 109 million people cannot simply create a second Nile, but they can choose to use water more efficiently, protect farmland, build cities that are truly accessible, generate quality jobs, expand opportunities for women, invest in the youth, and let many communities help shape the future. The greatest achievement of modern Egypt, in the end, will not be another monument that stands for 4,000 years. It will be creating a country where over 100 million living people have enough water, space, and opportunity to build a life that belongs to them. If this story makes you see Egypt as a living society rather than just a past civilization, keep journeying with us to places where the people of the present are always far more complex than their most famous images.